Let's dive into today's topic. Today, I want to talk to you about 7 habits for highly effective government contractors. And this is just a play off of Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, The Powerful Lessons of Personal Change, and Stephen Covey right there. This book, the first time I read this book was back in March 1997. Not to date myself, but I just dated myself. I was in the Army. I was working for the Secretary of the Army back then. And I was very fortunate because if you don't know this about me, when I started my Army career, I started in the Airborne Rangers. So I was in special operations when I got into the Army. And by the time I got out, I was working for the Secretary of the Army. So I had very good career trajectory. And I was only in 6 years. So it was a really good trajectory for me to be able to learn about the Army. And when I was working for the Secretary of the Army, back then, everybody was getting caught up on the Stephen Covey bandwagon about, hey, have you read this guy's book? And I was a junior enlisted guy around a bunch of 3- and 4-star generals. And so it was perfect for me to begin to get exposed to this. But for a lot of people, they buy books like this, these self-help books or, educational books, whatever. And they tend to buy it and pay lip service to it. But one of the things I like about what I've done, I read this book every year, at least once a year. I read it. And so I either read it or nowadays I got the audio. And so I listen to that. 14 hours, by the way. So it's a commitment, but it's a commitment to my growth and to my company's growth, et cetera. But I've signed it over and over and over again throughout the years. And at one point, I forgot to sign it for a while and I just signed my name and wrote many, many years. But the reason I like it is it's got 7 habits and you don't have to perfect all of them at once. The idea of 7 habits is to kind of look at one and work on it for a little bit. Ben Franklin had this set of 13 virtues or habits that he had, and he would take one and work on it for a week and then work on the next one for a week. And he would just rotate his focus. Of course, he's trying to live the life of the habits, but he would pick one and just kind of focus on that and drive it forward. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'm going to cover the 7 habits that are in here. And I want to tell you what these 7 habits mean to me from a government contracting perspective and what you might consider doing going into 2023. Like, thinking about this going into 2023. As I advise my customers, I come back and I look at things in here. Habit number 1, for example, let's just start with habit number 1, right? Habit number 1 is be proactive. And when you say that, most of us go, oh, I know what that means. Be proactive. It's like, perfect. But how does that apply to our world in government contracting, right? And be proactive, to me, just so we're clear, let's just back up for a second. Be proactive is the opposite of being reactive. And what I like to say is make things happen. Don't let them happen. Don't wait for them to happen. So in government contracting, when I talk about sales, I talk about it's a farming activity. You're proactively out there choosing that I want to plant corn and I'm going to do all the work it takes to get it done. You're proactively doing everything. Compared to reactive is hunting. You sit in a tree or a blind spot or whatever and you wait for a deer to walk by and you're reacting to that deer walking by, right? And so being proactive, a lot of us can from an initial level go, oh, I know what you're talking about. But when you begin to look at your activities that you're doing on a regular basis, are you being proactive? And let me just share a graphic really quick. This is the 7-step, not 7-step process, but the 7-step process for federal revenue success, right? We teach this. This is what we teach in our workshops. This is what I teach in training every single day, that there's 7 steps to success in the federal government from a revenue standpoint. You do research, you're understanding the buyer, and then you target, you find the right people, you outreach, you start making calls to them. And those 3 activities lead to you building relationships that will allow you to start finding slam dunk opportunities and write really winning proposals and lead to sales. And it's that circle that never ends. And the idea of proactiveness, when you look at that, right? Are you being proactive? Let's just pick one example, right? Are you being proactive with relationships? And so a lot of us have people we know and we get on calls and we talk to them, but we're not actually doing anything to proactively drive that relationship forward. We're kind of waiting for it to happen. Either we're waiting for when it makes sense for us to talk next, or when we're when they reach out. But being proactive, something so simple that you could do to turn this relationship building into a proactive activity for you is to schedule meetings on a regular basis with that person you're trying to build a long-term relationship with. A friend of mine, Tim, he and I, anytime we get on a call, we're talking about something and we're having our meeting, et cetera. When we get to the end, one or both of us is like, oh, wait, let's not drop. I don't care how much of a hurry we are to get off. We're proactively scheduling the next relationship so that we can keep it going forward. So we're proactively scheduling the next meeting. And that's what I want you to think about when you think about what is proactive. It's just looking in here and choosing things. Don't wait for opportunities to come to you. Build relationships with agencies and go find them and bring them into your pipeline. Don't just go to GovWin or SAM or something. That's more reactive. But proactive means you're building relationships. You're getting in there. So if you understand proactive and the difference between proactive and reactive in particular, put proactive in the chat. Let me know you're following along. Habit 2 is begin with the end in mind, right? And this one here, one of the things I was saying, I talked about setting a 2023 strategy, 5-year strategy, et cetera. And I'm about to do this also with my own environment, with my team, where we look at 2023 and say, well, what do we want done by the end of 23, and then we can begin to come back. But if you begin with the end in mind, and I do this naturally, I call it reverse engineering, right? I look at where I want to be and I back it all the way up. And so if you think about, I did a training recently and I said, somebody had said a number. I want 10 FTEs by the end of next year added to my company. So I want to grow my company by 10 people who are going to bring value into the company and we can deliver to our customers. So that was their goal. That was the end in mind. Well, then you begin to walk it back and you can start seeing, well, what will it take? What will it take to make sure that they're happy when they get here? So the internal stuff you might do. What will it take to attract them? So the recruiting process. What will it take to find billable work for them or something for them to be doing that is contributing? And so I have to go back, and that goes into the sales side. And when I think about beginning with the end in mind, it is always just about what do you want to achieve and how can you, so once you have a solid understanding on that, then everything else becomes clear. Think about it this way. If I'm here in DC area, right, and I want to travel, if I don't begin with the end in mind, then I just leave my house and I could be driving in any particular direction, and that's fine, but I'm never really going to get where I want to go because I haven't began with the end in mind. But if I sit there and begin with the end in mind, I'm in DC and I say, I want to go to San Francisco. Now I know where I'm going. Now I start making some major decisions. Am I driving, flying, et cetera? Okay, I'm driving. Am I going top of the country or bottom of the country? There's basically 2 main roads that go across the country. And, I'll look at that and decide, right? It's winter time. I'll probably shoot down and come across from the south side of the country to get to California. But I begin to work that back. Where am I staying? It's a 5 to 10 day trip, depending on how long you drive in a given day. What do I need? Do I need money to be able to buy food along the way, like cash, because I don't carry cash? Do I need cash to carry along? Do I need to pay attention to gas? How much, where are the gas stations? You plan out your trip. And that's the same thing in business, right? You want to begin with the end in mind. And one other way that I look at beginning with the end in mind is if I'm trying to hit a revenue goal, I always think to myself, what would it take to achieve that revenue goal? I like saying, if I have a revenue goal of $1 million, well, how many people have to be working for me at full time to achieve that goal? And so an example is if I want $1 million and the average person in my company bills out at $100 an hour, that's $200,000 in revenue. Just double the hourly rate is how you get the annual revenue. So if it's $200,000 revenue per person, I need 5 people to get 1 million. So every 1 million I want to get to, I'll need 5 people. But I couldn't do, none of that math would have mattered if I didn't know what I was trying to achieve. So as you move forward, begin with the end in mind. Habit 3 is put first things first. And I love this one, right? I just described with begin with the end in mind and then walk it all back. What are all the things you need? But one of the hardest things for us to do is the first thing, right? I talked to a customer the other day and she was saying she's got so much on her shoulders because she's doing a ton in her company plus dealing with the customer. And, but she says, I got all these things I want to do. And then by 9 o'clock, I'm completely off list, my to-do list, et cetera, because I'm getting contacted. I'm coming in here, customers contacting me, employees, et cetera. But if you put first things first, you make sure you do the most important thing to you and to your company before you let any other distraction happen, because no distraction is the end of the world. And let me give you a real end of the world example of this. If a plane is having problems, the masks drop down, and you're supposed to put a mask on your face. And I'm a parent, and I got last time I traveled with my sons, they were like 4 or something. But the instructions to passengers and to parents in particular is forget about the kid. Right? And people don't sometimes get this, but put your own mask on first is what they teach you. Put your own mask on first, and then take care of your children. Then put a mask on. And the reason is because if you go to put a mask on the kid, but the kid begins to fight, all of a sudden the air's bad and poof, you pass out. And then, life's no good. But if you put the mask on yourself first, you've taken care of yourself so that you can then take care of others. And if you think of it the same way, when you're looking at all the activity that might be on your plate, including like if you're an employee in a company and you got bosses coming at you or whatever, you've got to you got to think about putting the first things first. And so let's say you're a salesperson. The first thing first might really be making 5 calls every day. I don't care what anything else is going on. The first thing I'm doing is 5 calls because I never make new calls. I'm always getting pulled into things. Somebody's giving me a proposal or an RFP to read, or, hey, can you redline this? You know what it's like. We get all this activity. And if you determine what your first things first is, then you do that. And so you don't worry about a big, long list. We also call it the one thing, right? Looking at that one thing that you want to get done today. And you're not trying to write a book in a day, right? So it's a really small 1 hour or less type of activity is the way I describe it. But in government contracting, when you look across what you're doing, think about putting the first things first. So write that in chat if you're tracking on that. Put first things first. That's habit 3 in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. So habit 4, I've talked about a lot in my trainings, and it's win-win. The idea of win-win. So there's 4 ways a scenario can go with you and another party. You can have win-win. You can have lose-lose. You can have win-lose, and you can have lose-win. Hopefully you follow that. What you want is win-win. What I often find we get ourselves pulled into is lose-win. We're so worried about the other person. We're so worried about them winning that we let ourselves lose. And that's not good for anybody. I just use my kids as an example. It does me no good for me to win and them to lose, or for them to lose and me to win. We're eventually going to have a hard time. And it's the same thing for me and an agency buyer, right? I can't let them walk all over me. I can't let a customer push me into a corner where I'm losing, but they're winning. It's like, well, that sounds good. Oh, customer's always right and all that stuff, which my facial expression just said what that meant. But the idea is you want win-win, because when both you and the other party are winning, that means you both have taken the time to understand what would be a win for you, what would be a win for me. Let's move it forward. You can't possibly really win if the other person's losing. I know he describes win-lose, but if your customer or the other party is losing, then you're kind of losing yourself, even if you feel like a winner. And so as you move forward, think about what win-win could look like in there. And one of my examples for you for today, just to use it in government contracting world, is think about teaming. I've often seen larges do this more than smalls, for sure. Larges are a big fan of win-lose. They're totally okay with, and I don't mean you if you're in a large, you an individual, but large companies, these billion-dollar companies, they don't care if the other party loses as long as they win. And they'll use excuses like, hey, we got stakeholders or stockholders or whoever. But don't let that happen, because it's not going to be good down the road. And if you get into a relationship where somebody's okay with them winning and you losing, walk away, right? And so when you go into a relationship for teaming, think about what I just said about larges. Never be that way. Always be this teaming partner who looks at the other person and go, how can I help them succeed as much as they want while also succeeding? Do you really need 80% of a contract, or can you give them 30 or 40%, right? Does it really matter? If you can find a really good team and then move forward on more contracts, then eventually you guys will reach all these extra goals you want. So as you go into teaming relationships and you're having discussions about an opportunity and putting a team together, as you're having it, don't just make it about lawyerly legal words, but make it about win-win. How do we make sure you win and we win? So that was a win-win. Put win-win in the chat if you understand what I'm talking about there, and you see it, you agree with it. This next one is one of my favorite, and I keep saying to my kids, you need to seek to first understand me before you be understood. That's not quite the way Stephen Covey meant it, but he says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. You may have heard this line, this phrase where people say you have two ears and one mouth. Use them in proportion. So listen twice as much as you talk. And when you listen twice as much as you talk, you naturally are going down that path of saying, I'm seeking to understand before I want to be understood. In government contracting, what this really means to me is seeking to understand the government. There's a line out there that I love throwing into my training that says people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so how do you show them that you care? Well, you listen to them. You have a conversation back with them about what they're saying. You don't listen to them and wait to say what you want, right? And so when you're out there having meetings with the government or teammates, right? When you're out there having meetings with people and you're having conversations, try to understand what they're sharing, what they're coming across. If you follow my approach, I talk about this for our workshop. We always tell them use call plans when you do an outreach. If you're following that approach and you've got questions, take the time to actually hear the question or the answer, right? And as they're talking back, and one of the ways you can seek further to understand before even being understood is to pull a thread. I like saying, hey, let me pull a thread on that, right? And so if they give you an answer back, you say, well, can I pull a thread on that? What does that mean here? I understand a little bit here, but can you expand on this over here? I'm seeking to understand. What did you just say? I don't want to just pretend like I know everything about it. I got a biggest compliment. Not the biggest compliment, one of the biggest compliments that I got for the way that I talk to our customers is somebody said, basically, I never felt for once that you were trying to sell or bring us in. You just were trying to understand our company and what we were trying to achieve. And when they said that, I really appreciated it because that's what we try to do is come in and just go, how can we help? How can we help? If it makes sense for us to work together, great. But I'm only going to work with 1% at most of the people I talk to and interact with, right? And so you want to do that same thing in your meetings is really show them that you care more about them and how you can help. And if one of the ways that you can help is you bringing your services or products, great. But the conversation will lead to that. But the way you get it to leading to that stage is seeking first to understand, then to be understood. Another quick thing about understood is to be understood is for, hey, let me tell you all my features, everything we do, everything our company does. That's seeking to be understood, right? You want to hear about their challenges and their goals so that you can then align it to your products and services, et cetera. So hopefully that made sense. As we go forward into habit 6, this one's called synergize. And this is a fun one because it piggybacks on obviously seek first to understand, then to be understood. So there, it's really about you and you're trying to listen to them. And this also, by the way, ties into win-win. All these habits tie in together. Actually, so if you've never read his book before, let me pull this up. So if you see this, where am I going? Right here. If you see this graph, right, he's trying to show, I can't point it on camera because my camera is reversed and I keep pointing the wrong direction. But if you look at that graph, this one, right? If you look at that, and I'm just showing you the big graphic at the moment, not the details. But Stephen Covey is saying these 7 habits are not 7 random habits that you can occasionally work on. They're interwoven and they work together to help you achieve your goal, whether it's personal change, personal improvement, professional development, et cetera, professional relationship building. But they work together. And so I talked about win-win. I talked about seek first to understand, then to be understood. Well, this habit 6 is synergize. And synergize means basically you're trying to find this level that's above compromise. And one of the ways that Stephen Covey talks about compromise is a loss. Even if it's an equal loss, it's a loss. When we come together, we compromise to go somewhere worse. One of the best ways I've heard to have conversations that I love that drives towards synergize is using yes and. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but sometimes when somebody says something, you can say no, but, right? No, you're wrong, but this or something, right? But you can change your way of talking to each other and say yes and. Hey, I think we should do this, right? And the other person's saying, I think we should do this. Yes, and we could also do this, and we could do this, right? And so you can have that type of conversation with your customers in business development when you're talking about ideas and requirements. Yes, we could do this, and we could do this or something. You can have it with your teammates, right? Yes, we could come together, and we can actually bring in this other company who might strengthen our team. But this idea of when you think about synergize, it's about trying to find a higher level of working together. There's this great graph. I just want to remind myself the words. So what he talks about is there's 3 levels of talking that we might talk to each other as we're moving forward. The first level might be defensive. I'm watching out for making sure we're getting what we need or something. The second level is respectful, right? So we're talking to each other, and this might be actually compromising to a degree. It is compromising in his words, but that's where you're working. And then the next level, when you get up to synergistic, it's win-win. That's when you've achieved win-win, is when you can go above the compromise where one or both of us have to lose something of what we wanted to, hey, how can we all get everything we want? That's totally possible, right? It's very possible for you to get what you want and another person to get what they want. That's win-win. And then seventh habit, which is, I think it's both my personal favorite that I need to do. Like, that's my New Year's resolution one. 7th habit is sharpen the saw. And this one, let me give you a quick story that's a perfect example for what it means by sharpening the saw. But basically, sharpening the saw means taking care of yourself, right? In a broader perspective, taking care of your company first, then your teammates and your customers. But if you think about a saw, this is why he says sharpen the saw. If you take 2 people out and they're racing to cut down the tree, they both start cutting down, but every 20 minutes or so, one of them stops and sharpens the saw. People are like, what are you doing? Sharpening your saw. That's not the time for it. Keep cutting. The other guy's cutting. And it's like, I get it. But the more that guy's saw is dulling, the less he's cutting. But every time I sharpen my saw, I'm able to go right back to the beginning speed of a fresh, sharp saw, and my tree will come down faster. That's the reason for calling it sharpening the saw. Well, for us, it's the same thing, right? Not to go too deep into this, but one example for me, just in day-to-day, is being physically fit. If I'm not physically fit, how can I come in and do what I need to? How can I bring the energy to you in these trainings? How can I go to customers and help support them, driving them forward? How can my mind be as sharp as it needs to be to read like that 150-page document I said that came out, read it and really begin to understand it and ask questions? So physically fit is my health. Am I exercising? Am I eating right, et cetera? But then there's also mentally fit, and there's these personal things. Well, you can attribute this back to government contracting as well, though. Sharpening the saw could be something like writing reusable content. So if you're writing proposals and RFI responses, you're going to have to be writing something about how do you do something, what's your approach. You could be writing some material. That could be sharpening the saw. Sharpening the saw that you could do right now going into 2023 is to look at your pipeline. And maybe I'll end with this tip here, right? For sharpening the saw. Look at your sales pipeline and sharpen it. Look in there and get rid of anything that pretty much is no. You're going to not bid it. I had a conversation with a customer the other day, and we were talking about it, and we're bouncing around a little bit. And I said, look, this thing should be no bid. He's like, well, but, and I said, no. When I talk to you about the 5 other opportunities, you're like, oh, that's awesome. Those are us. That's us. When I'm talking about this, you're like, And if you have to look at a pipeline opportunity and go, that maybe, it's like, get rid of it. There's a whole bunch of opportunities that are available for your company that make you excited and fit to your core competency. So my tip for you on sharpening the saw, this 7th habit, is look at your sales pipeline and get rid of the opportunities that are dulling your capture activity. Get them out of there and just leave in the true sharpened opportunities, the one of the slam dunks. It'll also free up room for you to add new ones next year. And then remember, government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. And part of the process is sharpening your saw. I'll see you at the next training.